The fluorescent lights of the police station cast harsh shadows across the precinct's worn linoleum floor. Officer Jack Thompson strode through the hallway, his boots echoing with each step. Fellow officers nodded in his direction, some with genuine respect, others with concealed discomfort. Thompson had earned a reputation for getting results, but his methods left a bitter taste in many mouths. In the break room, Thompson poured himself coffee while rookie officer Martinez gathered his belongings to leave. Thompson blocked his path, taking up more space than necessary. "Good patrol today, eh?" showed those troublemakers in the East Side who's boss. His voice carried an edge that made Martinez's shoulders tense. "Yeah, sure," Martinez mumbled, sliding past and avoiding eye contact. Other officers pretended to be absorbed in their paperwork, but their discomfort was palpable. Thompson either didn't notice or didn't care about the effect his presence had on his colleagues. Outside, several blocks away, an elderly woman shuffled along the sidewalk. Her gray hair was neatly pinned back, and she carried a worn shopping bag. To any passerby, she appeared to be just another neighborhood resident. But Mabel Johnson was anything but ordinary. Her keen eyes tracked Thompson and his patrol car as it rolled past, noting every detail in a small notebook disguised as a grocery list. Mabel had spent weeks establishing her cover, becoming a familiar face in the neighborhood. She'd witnessed Thompson's escalating behavior, the random stops that targeted specific demographics, the unnecessary roughness, the way he seemed to relish the fear he inspired. Each incident was meticulously documented and transmitted to her handlers. The confrontation happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Thompson and his partner were conducting what they called a routine patrol of the neighborhood. Mabel was positioned perfectly, playing her role as she crossed the street with her shopping bag. Thompson's voice rang out, unnecessarily loud and aggressive. "Hey, you there! Stop right where you are!" Mabel kept walking, knowing exactly what would happen next. Thompson's footsteps quickened behind her. She felt his hand grab her shoulder roughly, spinning her around. Her shopping bag dropped, contents spilling across the sidewalk. When an officer tells you to stop, you stop. Thompson's face was inches from hers, his breath hot with anger. His partner hung back, looking uncomfortable, but saying nothing. What happened next was both expected and shocking in its violence. As Mabel reached down to collect her scattered belongings, Thompson misinterpreted her movement. Or perhaps he didn't misinterpret it at all. His baton came down with practiced efficiency, catching her across the shoulders. Mabel fell forward, her palms scraping against the concrete. The pain was real, but Mabel maintained her composure. Even as Thompson roughly cuffed her, she was already calculating her next move. Her hand, trembling but purposeful, brushed against the emergency signal device hidden in her jacket pocket. One quick press activated the transmission that would set everything in motion. Thompson had no idea that this moment, this display of casual brutality, would be the beginning of his downfall. As he hauled Mabel to her feet, she caught a glimpse of his satisfied expression. It was the look of a man who believed himself untouchable, about to learn just how wrong he was. The precinct erupted into chaos when federal agents stormed through the doors. Thompson, who had been completing paperwork on what he thought was a routine arrest, found himself suddenly surrounded. The color drained from his face as badges were flashed and orders barked. His eyes locked with Mabel's, no longer stooped and elderly, but standing tall, professional, and radiating authority. "Officer Jack Thompson, you're under arrest for civil rights violations, excessive use of force, and assault of a federal agent." The words echoed through the suddenly silent precinct. Thompson's hands, usually so quick to restrain others, now trembled as cold metal handcuffs clicked around his wrists. His fellow officers stood frozen, a mix of shock and something else on their faces, relief perhaps, or vindication. The same colleagues who had laughed at his jokes hours earlier now stepped back, creating physical distance between themselves and his disgrace. One by one, they turned away, finding sudden interest in their computer screens or paperwork. Across town, in a secure facility, Mabel sat in a briefing room with 5 other undercover agents. The bruises from Thompson's attack were still visible on her shoulders as she changed into her regular clothes. Agent Sarah Chen, who had been investigating corruption in the narcotics division, shared footage from her body camera, showing officers planting evidence during raids. "It's not just Thompson," Chen explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The whole precinct operates on a system of selective enforcement and covered-up brutality. Thompson was just the most blatant about it." Another agent, Marcus Williams, spread photographs across the table. Officers accepting envelopes behind bars, late-night meetings with known criminals, evidence disappearing from lockup. "We've got documented cases going back 3 years," he said. "Thompson's arrest is just the beginning." Meanwhile, in the holding cell, Thompson sat alone on a metal bench, his police uniform now feeling like a costume. Through the bars, he could see officers he'd worked with for years walking past without making eye contact. His phone calls went unanswered. The thin blue line he'd believed would always protect him had vanished. Hour after hour passed as Thompson tried to process his new reality. He'd gone from respected officer to prison inmate in the space of an afternoon. His mind raced through options, each less promising than the last. The lawyers he knew wouldn't return his calls. The union representative spoke to him briefly, choosing words carefully and making no promises. In the corner of his cell, Thompson noticed crude scratches in the wall, tallies made by previous occupants counting their days. How many of those had he put there himself? How many had been guilty? How many innocent? For the first time, these questions carried personal weight. Back in the briefing room, Mabel and her team worked late into the night, building their case. "Thompson's arrest will shake things up," she told her colleagues. "Some officers will try to distance themselves. Others will close ranks. That's when mistakes get made. That's when we'll see who's really involved." The team had prepared for this moment for months. Each agent had gathered evidence of systematic abuse, racial profiling, excessive force, falsified reports. Thompson's assault on a federal agent would be the key that unlocked everything else. His arrest wasn't just about one racist cop. It was about exposing a culture of corruption that had festered for years. As night fell over the city, 3 different scenes played out simultaneously. Mabel and her team organizing their evidence and planning their next moves. Thompson lying awake in his cell, realizing the magnitude of his fall, and the police precinct buzzing with nervous energy as officers wondered who would be next. The federal building's conference room felt too small for the weight of the conversation taking place within it. Mabel stood at a whiteboard covered with photos, names, and connecting lines that stretched far beyond Thompson. Her investigation had uncovered links to Judge Harrison, who consistently dismissed brutality complaints, and Councilman Peters, whose campaign contributions came from suspiciously anonymous sources. "The rot goes deeper than we thought," Mabel said, capping her marker. That's when Alex Ramirez entered the room. His presence commanded attention, not through intimidation like Thompson, but through the quiet intensity that marked him as someone intimately familiar with their mission. The meeting that followed proved more personal than Mabel expected. Over coffee that grew cold and untouched, Alex shared his story. "It was Christmas Eve 2018, he began, his voice steady, but his knuckles white around his cup. "My brother Miguel was driving home from work. He was stopped by officers from the same precinct. They said he matched a description." Mabel watched as Alex recounted how his brother, a high school teacher, was dragged from his car, beaten, and arrested on fabricated charges. The dashcam footage mysteriously disappeared. Judge Harrison dismissed their complaint. Miguel lost his teaching position and 6 months later took his own life. "The system didn't just fail him," Alex said, finally meeting Mabel's eyes. It worked exactly as certain people wanted it to work. The silence that followed felt like a physical presence in the room. Meanwhile, Thompson's attempts at damage control weren't going well. He approached Officer Sullivan in the prison's visitation room, hoping to remind him of their shared history. "Remember that night on 4th Street? How we handled those protesters? You said I did the right thing then." Sullivan's response was cold. "I never said that, Jack. And if you mention my name again, I'll testify about what really happened that night." He left Thompson sitting alone, the message clear. There would be no support from his former brothers in blue. Thompson tried calling other officers, but phones went unanswered. Messages were left on read. The same men who had backed him up in violent confrontations, who had corroborated his questionable reports, who had shared drinks and laughed at his racist jokes, they all disappeared. In his cell at night, Thompson began to understand his isolation. He'd mistaken fear for respect, compliance for loyalty. Now, watching the guards pass, some of them former colleagues, he saw in their eyes what others must have seen in his: power without compassion, authority without responsibility. Back at the federal building, Mabel and Alex worked late, piecing together years of complaints, suspicious financial records, and testimony from reluctant witnesses. "Each case follows the same pattern," Alex noted, spreading out files. "Excessive force, falsified reports, charges that stick to innocent people, and judges who look the other way." The evidence mounted: internal affairs complaints that were buried, witnesses who were intimidated into silence, body camera footage that conveniently malfunctioned during crucial moments. What had started as an investigation into one racist officer had exposed a network of corruption that protected itself through fear, money, and political influence. Alex's personal stake in the investigation added urgency to their work. Every document they uncovered, every witness they interviewed, brought them closer to exposing not just individual bad actors, but a system that enabled and protected them. For Alex, it was a chance to find justice for Miguel. For Mabel, it was confirmation that her dangerous undercover work had been worth the risk. In a secluded office of the federal building, Mabel gathered her expanded team around a large digital display. The screen showed a complex web of connections: corrupt officers, judges, politicians, and local business owners who benefited from selective law enforcement. Agent Chen pointed to a series of suspicious wire transfers. These payments coincide perfectly with dropped charges against certain businesses. Alex pulled up surveillance photos showing late-night meetings between Councilman Peters and several high-ranking officers. "They're getting sloppy," he noted. "They think Thompson's arrest is an isolated incident. They don't realize how much we've already uncovered." The team divided into specialized units. Some focused on financial trails, others on gathering testimony from victims of police brutality. A tech team worked on recovering deleted body camera footage and supposedly lost evidence. Each piece they uncovered revealed new connections, new conspiracies. Meanwhile, in his cell, Thompson reached his breaking point. 3 weeks of isolation had worn down his arrogance. The wall of silence from his former colleagues spoke volumes. During another sleepless night, he made his decision. Through his court-appointed lawyer, he requested a meeting with federal prosecutors. The meeting room was small and stark. Thompson, no longer in his police uniform, seemed diminished in his orange jumpsuit. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Sarah Martinez, laid out his options clearly. "You're facing serious time, Thompson. But if you're willing to talk about what you know, names, dates, specific incidents, we might be able to work something out." Thompson's hands shook as he considered his position. The same racist ideology that had driven his actions now battled with his instinct for self-preservation. Finally, he spoke. "There's a lot to tell. About Judge Harrison's special arrangements, about Councilman Peters and those construction contracts, about which businesses we were told to leave alone and which ones to target. Back at the federal building, Mabel's team received an unexpected breakthrough. A young officer named Rodriguez, relatively new to the force, came forward. "I can't sleep anymore," he confessed. "Last month, I saw Lieutenant Carson plant drugs in a teenager's car. When I tried to report it, my sergeant told me to forget about it if I wanted to keep my job." The team quickly moved to protect Rodriguez. They'd learned from experience that whistleblowers often faced retaliation. Within hours of Rodriguez's statement, anonymous threats started arriving at his home. His car was vandalized. Messages appeared in his locker warning him to stay quiet. Mabel's team set up surveillance around Rodriguez's home, but the intimidation attempts continued. They came from untraceable numbers, from different locations, showing how deep the corruption network reached. "They're organized," Alex observed. "They've done this before." The pressure intensified when Rodriguez's sister, a city employee, suddenly found herself under investigation for alleged time card fraud. The message was clear: stay quiet, or everyone you care about becomes a target. But instead of silencing them, these tactics only strengthened the team's resolve. Each threat, each attempt at intimidation, provided new evidence of conspiracy. They documented everything, building an airtight case that went far beyond individual acts of brutality. As Topic 4 draws to a close, the investigation has expanded far beyond Thompson's original arrest. The team has uncovered a vast network of corruption, while Thompson himself has decided to turn informant. The stakes have risen dramatically, with both sides knowing that the next moves could determine everything. The prosecutor's office was eerily quiet during Thompson's late-night meeting. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, he began naming names, dates, and incidents. His voice, once commanding, now wavered as he detailed years of systematic abuse. "Judge Harrison has a special signal," he explained. "When he adjusts his tie during arraignment, it means he wants the charges dropped, but only for certain defendants, ones who paid for protection." Thompson's revelations continued for hours. He described how Lieutenant Carson coordinated with local business owners, accepting payments to either harass their competitors or ignore their violations. He detailed the complex system of kickbacks from towing companies, bail bondsmen, and even local repair shops. "The racism," Thompson admitted, his eyes fixed on the table. "It wasn't just personal prejudice. It was policy. We were told which neighborhoods to target, which communities to pressure. The department called it proactive policing, but we all knew what it really meant." Meanwhile, across town, Mabel and her team made a breakthrough. A junior IT technician had discovered a hidden folder on the precinct's backup server. Inside were years of deleted body camera footage, carefully archived despite orders to destroy it. The videos showed countless incidents of abuse, planted evidence, and coordinated cover-ups. "Look at this," Mabel called to Alex, pointing at her screen. The footage showed a familiar scene, a traffic stop that ended in violence. But this wasn't just another example of brutality. The timestamp matched the night Alex's brother was arrested. The footage that supposedly never existed was right there, proving everything Miguel had claimed. Alex gripped the back of Mabel's chair, his knuckles white. The video showed his brother following every officer's command, showing no resistance. Yet the officers escalated the situation, their actions clearly premeditated. Most damning was the casual conversation afterward, where they discussed teaching another one a lesson. The discovery of this footage changed everything. It wasn't just evidence of past crimes. It was proof of an ongoing conspiracy to obstruct justice. Each deleted video represented a deliberate attempt to hide the truth, with judges, prosecutors, and police officials all playing their parts. Back in the prosecutor's office, Thompson struggled with his own demons. Every name he gave up, every incident he described, forced him to confront his role in the system. "I told myself I was just doing my job," he muttered. But I knew. Every time I wrote a false report, every time I looked the other way, every time I targeted someone because of their race, I knew what I was doing. His confession painted a picture of gradual corruption. It hadn't happened all at once. Small compromises led to bigger ones. Racial prejudice became official policy. Violence became routine. And anyone who objected was either silenced or driven out. As Thompson continued talking, Mabel's team worked through the night, cataloging the recovered footage. Each video corroborated previous complaints that had been dismissed. Each frame provided evidence of crimes that had gone unpunished. The sheer volume of evidence was overwhelming, but it told a clear story of systematic abuse and cover-ups. The weight of these revelations affected everyone differently. Thompson, stripped of his power and facing his own prejudices, began to understand the true impact of his actions. Mabel and her team, energized by the breakthrough, prepared for the next phase of their investigation. And Alex, finally holding proof of his brother's innocence, allowed himself to feel something he hadn't in years: hope for justice. The community center buzzed with nervous energy as Mabel's team prepared for a crucial meeting. Representatives from various civil rights organizations, community leaders, and families of victims filled the room. Security was tight, federal agents positioned at every entrance, checking for weapons and recording devices. The stakes were too high to risk infiltration. Mabel stood at the podium, the recovered footage queued up behind her. "What you're about to see isn't easy to watch," she warned. "But it's necessary to understand the scope of what we're dealing with." The lights dimmed, and the first video began playing. Gasps and muffled cries filled the room as years of documented abuse played out on screen. Community leaders who had been dismissed as troublemakers saw their long-ignored complaints validated. Parents who'd lost children to police violence finally had proof that their loved ones weren't at fault. The evidence was undeniable, and the community's response was immediate and unified. Meanwhile, Thompson sat in his cell, watching news coverage of the meeting on a small TV. His face appeared frequently in the footage being shared, a stark reminder of his role in the system's abuse. Other inmates, many of whom he'd arrested, watched him with a mixture of contempt and satisfaction. His isolation grew deeper. The decision to continue cooperating weighed heavily on him. Each day brought new threats. Notes slipped under his cell door, whispered warnings during transport, suspicious accidents in the prison yard. His former colleagues made it clear, silence was his only safe option. But Thompson had crossed a point of no return. During another session with prosecutors, he revealed details about offshore accounts, shell companies used to launder protection money, and a sophisticated network of informants who helped police target specific businesses and individuals. The system wasn't broken, he explained, his voice hollow. It was working exactly as designed. We weren't meant to protect and serve everyone, just the ones who could pay or the ones who looked like us. Back at the community center, Mabel's presentation concluded with a call to action. The team needed witnesses willing to testify, documents that had been hidden, and any additional evidence that could strengthen their case. The response exceeded their expectations. Lines formed at the sign-up tables. People brought forward old cell phone videos, saved text messages, and documented complaints that had been ignored. Each piece of evidence reinforced the others, creating an undeniable pattern of systemic abuse. But with increased community involvement came increased risk. Anonymous threats began targeting community leaders who'd spoken out. Cars were vandalized, windows broken, and threatening messages left on doorsteps. The corrupt officers' network was fighting back, trying to maintain their grip on power through fear. Mabel's team worked overtime to protect their witnesses. Safe houses were established, security systems installed, and protective details assigned to key individuals. The community refused to be silenced, turning fear into determination. As the day ended, Mabel received an urgent call. Their primary witness, Officer Rodriguez, had been attacked outside his home. Though he survived, the message was clear. No one was safe. The corrupt system was fighting for its survival, and it would use any means necessary to maintain its power. The hospital corridor where Officer Rodriguez lay recovering became a focal point of tension. 2 federal agents stood guard outside his room while doctors treated his injuries: 3 broken ribs, a concussion, and multiple contusions. The attack had been professional, designed to send a message rather than kill. Thompson, hearing about the attack in his cell, recognized the pattern. He'd seen similar warnings carried out before, though he'd never participated directly. The knowledge of what might come next weighed heavily on him. His fellow inmates could sense his unease, watching as he paced his cell like a caged animal. "They'll come for me next," he told his lawyer during an urgent meeting. "But if they think this will shut me up, they're wrong." His hands trembled as he wrote down new names and dates, including details about previous witness intimidations. His racist beliefs still lingered, but something else had taken root, perhaps the first genuine moral conviction he'd felt in years. Across town, Mabel and her team transformed their office into a command center. Screens displayed surveillance feeds from key locations, while analysts tracked suspicious financial transactions and unusual police movements. Alex coordinated with witness protection teams, ensuring their growing list of informants remained safe. "They're getting desperate," Mabel observed, studying reports of increased police activity in targeted neighborhoods. "They know we're close to something big." Her suspicions were confirmed when an anonymous source provided documents showing massive fund transfers from known crime families to accounts connected to senior police officials. The pressure on Thompson intensified. During his daily exercise period, a new inmate approached him. "Lieutenant Carson sends his regards," the man whispered. "Says it's not too late to remember where your loyalty lies." Thompson recognized the implicit threat, but also knew turning back wasn't an option. In a secure conference room, Mabel's team prepared for their biggest operation yet. "Tomorrow's raid will hit 12 locations simultaneously," she explained to her assembled agents. "Evidence lockers, private residences, and safety deposit boxes. One leak, one mistake, and the whole thing falls apart." The stakes became personal when Alex discovered surveillance photos of his family in Carson's office, a clear threat. Instead of backing down, he channeled his anger into the investigation. "They used these tactics to silence my brother," he told Mabel. "I won't let them silence anyone else." Thompson made his final decision during another sleepless night. He requested an emergency meeting with prosecutors and provided the last piece of crucial evidence: details about a hidden server containing years of incriminating correspondence between corrupt officers and city officials. As dawn approached, 3 separate scenes unfolded across the city. Mabel's team gearing up for their coordinated raids, Thompson being moved to a secure facility under heavy guard, and corrupt officers frantically trying to contain their crumbling empire. The tension reached a breaking point when news of Thompson's latest cooperation leaked. Emergency alarms blared through the secure facility as 2 guards attempted to breach his new cell. Only the quick action of federal agents prevented what would have clearly been an accident during transport. This failed attempt to silence Thompson proved to be the corrupt system's biggest mistake. It provided irrefutable evidence of the conspiracy reaching into the prison system itself, adding new charges and new leads to the investigation. Dawn broke over the city as Mabel's team launched their synchronized raids. SWAT teams, federal agents, and cybersecurity specialists moved simultaneously across 12 locations. At the police precinct's records room, agents discovered officers frantically shredding documents. The emergency server shutdown came too late. Forensic specialists had already begun downloading terabytes of incriminating data. Lieutenant Carson was arrested in his home, still deleting files from his personal laptop. Judge Harrison was taken into custody during his morning golf game, his carefully cultivated public image crumbling as cameras captured him in handcuffs. Councilman Peters attempted to flee, but was intercepted at a private airfield. The courthouse buzzed with unprecedented activity. The gallery filled with community members, journalists, and law enforcement officials as Thompson was led to the witness stand. His orange jumpsuit stood in stark contrast to his former police uniform, but his posture remained rigid, military-trained. "Begin with the night of September 15th, the prosecutor directed. Thompson's testimony started slowly, but gained momentum as he described years of systematic abuse. He detailed how racial profiling wasn't just encouraged, but rewarded, how evidence was routinely planted, and how whistleblowers were silenced. From her position near the back of the courtroom, Mabel watched his former colleagues' reactions. Some stared at the floor, others glared with naked hatred. The thin blue line was fracturing under the weight of truth. Officer Thompson, defense attorneys attempted to discredit him. "Isn't it true that you're testifying only to save yourself?" Thompson's response surprised everyone. "I'm testifying because I have to live with what I've done. Saving myself stopped being possible a long time ago." As Thompson continued, Alex worked with technical teams outside the courtroom, preparing to present the digital evidence. The recovered server data revealed years of coordinated corruption, rigged investigations, fabricated evidence, and systematic targeting of minority communities. The defense team's strategy shifted from denial to deflection. They painted Thompson as a rogue officer, a bad apple, acting alone. This narrative crumbled as Mabel's team presented surveillance footage, financial records, and testimony from multiple witnesses. Thompson's former partner attempted to discredit him by revealing past racist comments and actions. Instead of denying them, Thompson acknowledged his prejudices. "Yes, I was racist. I still struggle with those thoughts. But that's why my testimony matters. I was part of a system that encouraged and rewarded those beliefs." The courtroom fell silent as evidence mounted. Body camera footage showing orchestrated brutality, emails discussing which communities to target, financial records revealing patterns of bribes and kickbacks. Each piece of evidence reinforced the others, creating an undeniable picture of institutional corruption. As the day's session ended, Mabel noticed Thompson's demeanor change. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by something closer to resignation. He had crossed a point of no return, and his testimony would affect not only his future, but the entire system he had once served. The courthouse security tightened as Mabel prepared to take the stand. The tension in the air was palpable. This wasn't just another testimony, but the culmination of months of undercover work and years of systematic abuse. "Agent Johnson," the prosecutor began, "please describe what you witnessed during your undercover operation." Mabel's voice remained steady as she recounted her experiences. She described not just Thompson's actions, but the entire system of corruption she'd uncovered. The evidence she presented was damning: surveillance footage, financial records, and most crucially, the recovered server data. The courtroom screens displayed a complex web of transactions linking police officials to criminal enterprises. Email chains revealed explicit discussions about which neighborhoods to target, which businesses to protect, and how to handle anyone who questioned their methods. "This spreadsheet," Mabel explained, pulling up a new document, "tracks what they called performance metrics. Officers were rewarded not for reducing crime, but for maintaining what they termed demographic control in certain neighborhoods." As she spoke, Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His moment of truth approached. The defense attorneys had painted him as a scapegoat, but he knew he had to do more than just confess his own crimes. In an unexpected turn, Thompson stood up. "Your Honor, I request permission to make a statement." The judge, after a moment's consideration, nodded. "What we did wasn't just about racism or brutality," Thompson began, his voice carrying across the silent courtroom. "It was about power and money, every false arrest, every planted evidence, every beaten suspect. It all fed into a system that enriched those at the top while destroying communities at the bottom. He went on to detail specific incidents, naming officers, judges, and politicians who had participated. His testimony corroborated everything in Mabel's evidence, adding personal witness to the documentary proof. The defense team's carefully constructed narrative crumbled as Thompson spoke. Their strategy of portraying him as a lone racist officer fell apart as he described departmental policies, unofficial quotas, and systematic targeting of specific communities. Mabel watched as decades of corruption unraveled in real time. The evidence she'd gathered, combined with Thompson's insider testimony, exposed not just individual bad actors, but an entire system designed to protect itself while exploiting those it claimed to serve. The judge listened intently, taking notes as Thompson confessed to his role in the corruption. But more importantly, he detailed how the system had operated, how it had sustained itself, and how it had silenced anyone who tried to expose it. As the session drew to a close, the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. Journalists scribbled frantically, community members whispered among themselves, and police officials sat in stunned silence. The truth, so long suppressed, was finally emerging in all its ugly detail. The judge's face remained impassive, but his frequent glances at the evidence display suggested he was processing the magnitude of the revelations. Tomorrow, he would render his decision, one that would affect not just Thompson and his colleagues, but the entire justice system in the city. The judge's chamber clock ticked loudly in the silence before his return to the courtroom. When he finally emerged, his expression was grave. "In my 30 years on the bench," he began, "I have never seen such comprehensive evidence of systematic corruption and abuse of power." The sentencing began with Thompson. "Mr. Thompson, while your cooperation has been noted, it doesn't erase your actions. 20 years, with possibility of parole after 12. Thompson nodded, accepting his fate. His expression showed neither relief nor despair, just acceptance. The judge continued through the list of defendants. Lieutenant Carson received 30 years. Judge Harrison was disbarred and sentenced to 15 years. Councilman Peters and other involved officials received similar sentences. The corrupt system's architects would face significant consequences for their actions. But the judge wasn't finished. Beyond these individual sentences, I am ordering a complete federal oversight of the police department. All officers will undergo mandatory retraining. An independent civilian review board will be established with real power to investigate complaints. Mabel sat in the courtroom, watching as years of work culminated in this moment. The community members behind her wept quietly, some from joy, others from the weight of vindication after years of being ignored and disbelieved. Outside the courthouse, Alex faced a crowd of reporters. "Today isn't just about punishing corrupt officers," he declared. "It's about acknowledging a truth many of us already knew, that the system wasn't broken, it was functioning exactly as designed. Now we have a chance to build something better." Thompson was led back to his cell, but something had changed. The weight of his prejudices, while not gone, had shifted. In his final statement to the court, he'd said, "I can't undo what I've done, but maybe by telling the truth, I can help prevent others from doing the same." The impact rippled through the city. The police department underwent a massive reorganization. Young officers, previously silenced by the corrupt system, stepped forward to help implement reforms. Community leaders were given real voices in police policy and oversight. Mabel's team wasn't finished. They used the evidence and methods from this case to launch investigations in other cities, knowing that similar systems of corruption existed across the country. Their success had created a blueprint for exposing and dismantling institutional racism and corruption. In the final scene, months later, Mabel and Alex stood in front of Miguel's grave. He would be proud, Mabel said softly. "His death wasn't in vain." Alex nodded, placing fresh flowers on the grave. Behind them, the sun set on a city in transformation. The police academy instituted new training programs, emphasizing community service and cultural understanding. The Citizen Review Board, now with real power, began handling complaints with genuine investigation and consequences. Slowly but surely, trust began to rebuild between law enforcement and the communities they served. Thompson, in his prison cell, began writing a detailed account of his journey from racist officer to reluctant truth-teller. His story would later be used in police training programs as a cautionary tale about how good intentions can be corrupted by prejudice and power. The final montage showed a city healing, community police forms with honest dialogue, civilian oversight committees reviewing body camera footage, and most importantly, a new generation of officers being trained to protect and serve all citizens equally. This concluded the story, bringing together themes of justice, redemption, and systemic change, while acknowledging that true transformation requires ongoing commitment and vigilance.